Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the latest episode of Biological Fitness. So we are going to explore an awareness through movement lesson today, which is going to pick up on many of the same themes as we did last time, but it's going to be in a new configuration. And in particular, the movements we're going to do will probably remind you of a very traditional exercise, otherwise known as crunches. But that's not what this is about. So even though you're going to be doing movements that if someone, let's say, was to come in halfway through and see what you were doing, they'd think, oh, you're doing crunches because of the shapes and the movements that you're making. What we're going to be after is a continuous refining of the movement. So even as we make these movements, we're going to be noticing details that if you did decide to do a bunch of crunches, you probably wouldn't be paying attention to at all. And unlike an exercise routine where, generally speaking, one of the ways that people kind of measure their progress is basically how many times did I do the movement? How many reps can I do? What we're after is a sense that every movement you make is of higher quality than the previous movement. So throughout the process today, you're going to hear me emphasizing that the size of the movements is not important, which means I'm going to encourage you to make smaller movements than you can do often in order not to go into strain. And I'm also going to emphasize taking your time with the movements, including taking your time between movements. So making use of rest. This is very important. Again, what we're after here is different than what you do in a typical exercise. What we're after is getting increasing clarity about the way your body is functioning so that as you go on, you have more and more of a sense that it's like in your mind's eye, you can see your whole body and how all the parts work together as a whole as you move. And this is a pretty good formula, generally speaking, for efficient movement. Efficient movement happens when the whole body is integrated into the movement. When we have a sense that we've kind of divided ourselves up into parts and I'm doing something with this part of my body and something with that part of my body, that's when it's very easy to go into strain. So that's the basic, overview of what we're going to be doing. It'll be a lesson done lying on the back on the floor. So other than just having a comfortable place to be on the floor, you don't need much else in order to set up. And before you come to the floor, what I'll invite you to do is to begin simply by walking through your space. So just begin to walk and notice what's your sense of comfort in walking right now. And then in particular, bring your attention to your head on top of your spine. How comfortable does your head feel? How balanced? How high off the ground is your head? And just notice what happens with your head as you step. Do you feel slight shifts of the position of your head as you step with the right foot, step with the left foot? And now continuing to keep your head in your attention, expand your focus to take in the whole length of your spine with your head on top. And you're not measuring it with a ruler, but just get a sense of how long is your spine right now. And how long is your spine when you step with the right foot? How long is your spine when you step with the left foot? Do you get the sense that the weight of your head on top of your spine is easier to carry over one leg? Very nice. So now come down to the floor and please lie on your back. If it's comfortable, have the legs long, but otherwise you can bend the knees and stand the feet. And before we get into the movement, let's return to an idea that we've used before. And that is to think of your body, to sense your body, to imagine your body as being composed of 5 lines. So that is the line of your left leg from your heel all the way up into your pelvis, the line of your right leg, the line of your spine, including the head on top. And in your mind's eye, draw a line for each of your arms. And then as you breathe, just move your attention every few breaths from one line to another. Sense the length of each line. And also sense the relationship between the lines. For example, with the legs, what is the angle between the 2 legs? Or what's the angle between the left leg and the spine compared to the right leg and the spine? And can you sense more than one line at a time? For example, can you bring your attention both to your left arm and your left leg? Just notice the relationship between those lines. And then think of the right arm and the right leg. Or think of a diagonal relationship, your left arm and your right leg, your right arm and your left leg. And come again now to move your attention slowly up and down the length of your spine. And now please bend your knees and stand your feet. And have the feet about shoulder width apart. And just take a moment to consider that you're still composed of 5 lines, but the lines of the legs now have been folded, right? So how do you sense those 5 lines in this new position? Notice how each of the 2 feet rest on the floor. Does it feel like one foot sinks into the floor a bit more than the other? And notice how you've positioned your 2 feet relative to the pelvis. Is one of your heels actually a little closer or further away from the pelvis than the other? And if you like, you can adjust that, but it's not important that they're perfectly even. Just find a comfortable place, more or less. And now bring your attention to the weight of your head on the floor. Notice, where's the point on the back of your head that contacts the floor? Where do you rest your weight? And then slowly roll your head a little to one side, back to the middle, a little to the other side. And with this movement as well, can you consider the 5 lines? Most importantly, the line of the spine, but what happens to the line of the spine when the head goes to the one side and to the other? Feel that each time you roll your head away from the middle, one side of your neck is lifting away from the floor and the other side is moving towards the floor. So just imagine how far down your back is a similar action happening in the spine. Do you feel like there's movement between the shoulder blades or even lower down, or does it just feel like the neck is doing this movement? Whatever's happening, just make the movement within a comfortable range. Now come back to the middle. And now I'm going to ask you to do a few movements that have no purpose other than to see how things are right now. So please don't make a large effort here. You're just testing something out. And the question is, what is the weight of your head? Again, we're not talking about literally what does it weigh, but how do you experience the weight of your head? Is it heavy? Is it light? So in a moment, I'm going to ask you to begin lifting your head away from the floor, but don't do it yet. Because the idea is that you're going to make an engagement to begin lifting the head. But the moment you feel that you have to start working harder, you're just going to give up. It's just a sense of like, if there was something heavy on the ground and you needed to move it somewhere, but you weren't yet sure if you could lift it alone or if you're going to need to bring a friend, you might grab that object and begin to do something without the intention of really lifting, just to get a sense of how heavy is this thing that I want to lift. So use that idea now. Just begin to lift the head, but give up as soon as you feel the effort that's necessary. And just do that 2 or 3 times and no more, and then leave it alone. And so you have a sense of the weight of your head right now. And that's all we're after at this point. Okay. Now, bring your hands together behind your head. Interlace the fingers and rest that part of your head that was on the floor in your hands. And now slowly lift your elbows away from the floor so that they point more towards the ceiling. And then just let the elbows come back towards the floor. So all you're doing now is this movement of the elbows coming away from the floor and then going back. And each time you put the elbows down, you can pause and rest. But when you lift the elbows and you bring them forward so that the forearms come next to your head, just feel, how does that change the shape of your upper back? So the elbows come together in the front, but maybe you can sense the possibility of a widening between your shoulder blades on the floor. And another thing that you can notice, which is very basic, but very important, it's essential to your understanding of efficient movement, is that as you lift the weight of the elbows away from the floor, feel that some other place presses back into the floor. So there's a sense of counterbalance there. So again, bring your attention to that area between your shoulder blades and just see if you can feel that some of the vertebrae seem to reach back towards the floor as the elbows come up. And the next time that the elbows are actually pointing towards the ceiling, keep them there. And just notice the coming and going of your breath now. And then when you make this movement, you're going to time the movement with the exhale. And what you're going to do is to gently, with the help of your arms, lift your head and look down in the direction of your belly button, and then lower the head right away. Lower the elbows all the way to the floor and rest. And then you're going to repeat that a few times, but do not think of this, as I said before, do not think of this as a crunch. And don't lift the head any higher than is easy right now. You might just barely lift it off the floor. But again, as you breathe out, the elbows are already pointing towards the ceiling before you lift the head, and you look down the front of your body. And just notice that this movement asks for a folding of the chest. So can your chest soften? And breathing out should help you to do that. And can you feel that the breastbone could even slide down away from your head, a little bit down towards your belly as you lift? Okay, put the head down now. And take one of your hands out from behind your head and put the palm of your hand at the top of your breastbone. So the other hand is still behind your head. And with that arm, bring the one elbow now towards the ceiling. You're going to lift the head again on the exhale, but when you lift, also use the hand on the breastbone to gently press the chest a little bit back towards the floor, and also to draw the breastbone down in the direction of your feet. And of course, with one hand behind the head, it's a different feeling, but also notice that the hand on the breastbone really can help you to make the head a little bit lighter. After one or two movements, rest your head on the floor and switch your hands so that the other hand is behind the head. And the hand that was previously behind the head comes to the breastbone. Make the same movement of lifting the head and looking down as you exhale, using your hand to guide your chest to soften and fold. And then rest your head on the floor again. And then one last time, have both hands behind the head, fingers interlaced. Bring both elbows forward towards the ceiling. But imagine you still had a hand to help you soften the breastbone as you lift the head. And as you do the movement now, again, notice how as you lift the head, part of the back presses into the floor. So as you feel that movement in the spine, the next time you put the head down, before you move again, include the idea of the spine pressing back in the beginning of the movement. So it's not that you lift the head and then just notice that's happening, but rather you bring the image of part of your back moving into the floor as a means to lifting the head right from the beginning. Very nice. And now rest your head on the floor, bring your hands out from behind your head and take your arms down by your side. If you like, you can lengthen the legs again and take a complete rest. Just feel, how is it now to sense into your 5 lines? In particular, the length of the spine. And again, roll your head gently left and right. And then bring your head back to the middle. And just rest, following the movement of your breath coming and going. Okay. And so as we move further into this process, you'll see that we're going to develop this basic movement with one little detail after another. So in a certain sense, it'll feel that you're not doing much different with each new variation. But as you'll see, this simple movement of lifting the head, there are many, many details we can explore. So bend your knees, stand your feet, and once again, interlace your fingers behind your head. And as you did earlier, without lifting the head, just a few times, bring the elbows towards the ceiling and then rest them back into the floor. But see if you have a clearer sense now about how when the elbows lift, that something's happening between the shoulder blades. Maybe there's a sense that the width of the back is changing. And then keep your elbows towards the ceiling. Breathe in, and as you exhale, lift the head, looking down with your eyes down the front of your body. And you don't hold the head for a long time in the air. You just lift and then you put it down. You can rest the elbows all the way to the ground, and you can take plenty of time between movements. If you lift mechanically, or if you lift in such a way that every few seconds you do a lift on a kind of a consistent rhythm, it becomes harder to distinguish one movement from the other. You want to be moving with a quality where if something happens that feels like a strain, you can adjust in the next movement. You can maybe make the movement smaller, or you can change the way you're paying attention to your movement. But even as we begin to bring in new variations, the idea is that each new movement is intended to be more comfortable than the last one. It's likely that as we go on, you'll be able to lift the head more easily. I think that you can more or less expect that to take place. But if you try to lift the head more just through willpower, you can undermine the process. So rest the head now. And I'm going to give you a couple of specific things to notice now the next time you make the movement. So bring the elbows forward. And now as you lift, feel your back pressing into the floor and try to notice, does it feel like the pressure into the floor is more on the right side of the spine or more on the left side of the spine? And don't try to change it. But for the next couple of movements, try to be more specific about what you feel. And then put the head down. And then bring the elbows forward, but don't lift the head, and just notice which elbow seems further away from the floor. And perhaps there's a way that you bring one elbow closer to your face than the other. Okay, so the elbows will be slightly asymmetrical. And the reason for that is the interlacing of the fingers is not a symmetrical situation. Right? So just take that into account, that maybe one elbow is a little further forward before you lift. And then once again, lift the head and feel, where does the pressure go into the floor? More to the right or more to the left? Okay. Now rest your head on the floor and keep your fingers interlaced, but bring them out from behind your head and hold your hands in front of your face so you can see your hands. You can see the interlacing. And just notice that one thumb is closer to your face as you look at your hands. So now change the interlacing so that the other thumb is closer. And clasp your hands completely. So have not only the fingers interlaced, but touch the palms together. And just feel, with this change in the way that your hands are grasping each other, the connection between your hands is different. And this is probably a bit strange because we all have a habit, even though we don't really think about it. When we interlace our fingers, we tend to do it the same way each time. So just notice this is maybe a little bit of a peculiar feeling. Go back to interlacing your fingers the way you did the first time. Just notice, does that feel a little bit more normal? Interlace the fingers and have the palms of the hands completely touching. And now go back and forth. Change the interlacing, and change it again, and change it again. Just keep doing that. And notice that you're changing more than the position of your fingers. So notice the action of your wrists. Notice that the whole of each hand is sort of spinning, one hand in relation to the other. And if you think of the line from your wrist down to your elbow, just think of the side of your arm that you're looking at. You can feel with one interlacing, just let's say pay attention to your left arm from the wrist to the elbow. As you interlace the fingers one way, that line is a little longer. And as you change the hands, that line gets a little shorter. And of course, the same thing is happening with the right arm. And although you can't really see it, you might even imagine that the same thing is happening on the other side of each of your two arms, on the side that you can't see. Feel that something changes in your elbows as well. Now, I'll just say that if you need to put your arms on the floor, you can do that. You've been holding your arms in the air for a while, but come back to it and just keep interlacing the fingers one way and the other. Sense the change in the wrists and the elbows, and now see if you can feel that something's happening with your upper arms. If you were to consider, again, just one of your arms, if you think of the forearm, you can notice that it's sort of turning around itself clockwise and counterclockwise. And in a subtle way, you might be able to feel the same thing happening in the upper arms. And as you change the interlacing from one grip to the other, now pay attention to your shoulder blades against the floor. Do you feel a slight movement of the shoulders? Think of the front of your chest, the collarbones, and how they connect from the front of each of your shoulders to the top of the breastbone. Is there a small movement in the collarbones as you change the interlacing? Okay, rest your arms on the floor. And just notice if making that movement and bringing your attention to the different bones of your arms and your shoulder girdle, are you beginning to get a bit of a clearer image of that part of yourself? Now interlace your fingers and just notice which thumb is on top. Is it that more habitual way of doing it? Bring your hands behind your head and now bring your elbows forward as if to lift your head, but don't lift. Just notice the feeling of the back of your head against your hands and which thumb is on top, which hand seems to carry more of the weight of your head. And then make just one movement as you exhale, lifting the head, feeling where does the weight fall into the ground through your back. And now change the interlacing of your hands so that it's in the non-habitual grip. And before you lift, again, sense how does your head rest on your hands. It's going to be a different connection. So just do that movement you did before of bringing the elbows together and then back towards the floor a few times. And just feel that The movement is familiar, but it feels just slightly different. And then keep the elbows pointed at the ceiling, breathe in. And then as you exhale, lift the head. And you've only made this small change with the fingers, but do you find that it's the same part of your back that goes into the floor, or is it a little different? You might find that just the feeling of the effort of lifting the head might be a little different. Maybe it's simpler here, or maybe you feel like you do a little more work. In any case, this is not how you usually have your fingers behind your head. The next time you bring the elbows forward and you prepare to lift, just pause for a moment to sense the position of each elbow as you did before. And then go ahead and lift the head. Feel how, again, you can soften your chest and how part of the spine presses back into the floor to help you lift the head. Very good. And then rest your head on the ground, take the hands out, bring them to your side. And again, take a complete rest. And then, once again, interlace your fingers and bring them behind your head. Now, this time, before you lift the head, bring the whole length of your spine into your attention. And feel your pelvis against the floor. And feel your low back. And then when you lift the head and you look down towards your feet, notice what changes. Do you feel that the pelvis can roll a little bit up the floor towards your head and the low back can flatten a little bit into the ground? Lower the head again and feel, where does the pelvis go to when you lower the head? And so now the movement hasn't changed, but you're being more deliberate now to include the pelvis and the low back into the image. So think from the very beginning that you're going to deliberately roll the pelvis up the floor and press the low back. And these movements, you could say they're movements of folding. You get shorter along the front of your body. And the back is rounding. But as part of that, can you imagine that the overall length along the back of your spine actually increases slightly? How does that sense of lengthening the spine to make the movement change the quality of what you do? Okay, place your head on the floor and just keep your hands behind your head. And now do a small movement of taking the pelvis a little away from your head. Not much, but feel how you create a little space in the low back there. And now keep the pelvis a little further down. Keep that little space in the low back. And then from that position, bring the elbows forward and lift the head. And how is that different than what you were doing before? So if you maintain that small space, you probably get the sense that less of your spine is involved in lifting the head. And you might find that the head feels a little heavier. So now go back to deliberately pressing the low back into the floor as you lift, so you can sense the difference. And then once again, take your arms out and take a rest. So again, what we're exploring here is a folding action. Making use of the flexor muscles on the front of your body. The the muscles that close the joints, right? So everything we're doing throughout this process is an investigation of how the flexors work. And so we're going to look at a little bit of a different part of that process now. Bend your knees and stand your feet. You just leave your arms now resting at your sides. But bring your attention to your legs and to the pressure of each foot on the ground. And now I'm going to ask you to just imagine something without actually moving. Please imagine that you lift one foot from the floor, but don't do it. Just imagine. Imagine that you do that once or twice, and then without ever doing the movement, just imagine lifting the other foot. And even though you haven't actually lifted either foot, if you keep playing with this, you imagine lifting one foot and then you imagine lifting the other, do you get a sense of which leg would be lighter to lift, which would be simpler for you to lift? And so as you imagine lifting the right foot from the ground, even just as if you were going to lift it 1 inch, and then you imagine lifting the left foot 1 inch, you might feel the faint stirrings of muscular contractions in that part of your body. And just feel, when are you kind of bracing for a larger effort? When does it seem like it wouldn't be as much work? So now just think of the side that you predict would be simpler and actually lift the foot just 1 inch from the ground and then place it back down. And then do that again. So like with the lifting the head, as you repeat this movement of lifting the foot and placing it back to the floor, and take plenty of time between movements. Don't make it mechanical and repetitive, or at least not on a sort of a steady rhythm. You repeat the movement, but each time you lift, even if you're not sure how this is possible, you ask yourself, how could I make the leg feel lighter? So feel, what does your pelvis do when you lift? What happens in your belly? And how are you timing this movement with your breathing? Remember, when you were lifting the head, we were emphasizing doing that with the exhale. So try lifting your foot as you breathe in. Try lifting your foot as you breathe out. Which one feels simpler? Okay, leave that foot on the floor and keep both feet standing, but just feel the sensation in the low back on the side where you were lifting the leg and on the other side. And now begin making the movement with the other leg. And right away, just notice, were you correct in your prediction? Does this leg feel lighter or heavier than the one that you began with? And whatever the case may be, have again this idea that each time you lift the foot, each time you lift the leg, you're looking for a way to make it lighter. And so notice, how does your knee travel through this space? Even if you don't increase the size of the movement, if you think that what you're doing is beginning to bring your knee up over your chest, does that change the feeling? And now lift one leg and lift the other. But think of this idea as if you were bringing your knees up over your chest when you make the movement. And also notice, how do you put the foot back down on the ground? Do you sort of just let the foot fall into the ground so that the ground catches your foot? go back to just lifting one foot and putting it down. But each time you put it down, can you place it on the floor very lightly, almost as if you didn't want to put any weight into the ground? So another way of saying that is place the foot on the floor in such a way that you could immediately lift it again. And you'll see that there's maybe a certain engagement that you have to become more aware of, because if you place the foot down to the ground more carefully, you actually have to use some of the same musculature that you do to lift. So try this with the other leg. Lift the leg, but then put the foot down so lightly that it could be immediately lifted again. Stay connected to your breath. Now lift one foot and lift the other again. It's like a marching step, but each time you lift one foot, you're placing the other one down. And each time you place a foot on the floor, you do it in such a way that it could be immediately lifted. Okay, let that all go. Keep the feet standing and bring your hands behind your head, fingers interlaced, and just make 2 or 3 movements as we've been doing. You breathe in, you exhale, lift the head, look down, softening the chest, feeling the movement of your pelvis. And just feel if after the variations that you did with lifting the legs, if there's something different about the lifting of the head. Okay, rest your head on the floor for a moment. And then lift the head, the elbows forward, and keep it lifted now. And you can place it down when you need to, but while the head is lifted now, lift one foot and put it down, and lift the other foot and put it down. Have this idea again that each time the foot touches the floor, it could be ready to lift it again right away. Okay, put everything down. Put your head down, put your feet down, take a rest. Okay, so interlace the fingers, maybe interlace them in the non-habitual way. Bring the hands behind the head. Stand your feet if you had the legs long. And now as you lift the head, lift the right foot from the floor and think of bringing the right elbow and the right knee towards each other. Do not try to touch. And then place the foot on the ground and place the head on the ground again. And keep investigating this movement. And I'll say it again, do not think of touching the knee and the elbow, even if that would be simple for you. Because again, we want to be in the mindset that we are investigating how the movement works rather than trying to do crunches, right? Trying to maximize the size of the movement. But feel how does your back interact with the floor as you lift the right foot and lift the head, and you think of the right elbow and knee coming towards each other. Okay, rest for a moment. We're going to continue working with the same movement. And as we've done before, we're going to bring in some more details. So the next time you do the movement, just notice more specifically the trajectory of the knee and the elbow. And if they were to go so far as touching, does it feel like the elbow would be coming towards the inside of the knee or towards the outside of the knee? So whichever it is, just make that an intentional thing now. And you're still not actually trying to touch, but think that you're moving your elbow either towards the inside or towards the outside of the knee, and sense the shape of your back as you make the movement, and then switch it. So that the elbow is aiming to the outside if it was going to the inside before, to the inside if it was going to the outside before, and just see if you can feel a subtle change throughout the whole length of your spine. Okay, put everything on the ground, take a rest, keep your feet standing. And then bring the hands behind the head. If you like, you can change the interlacing again. And once again, have your attention on the right elbow and the right knee as you lift the head and lift the right leg. And then place everything back on the floor. But now consider the timing. So when you lift the head and lift the foot, do they lift simultaneously, or do you notice that you actually lift the foot first, or you actually lift the head first? It might just be a moment before the other part lifts. But again, use your attention more specifically. And then when you realize what you're doing, again, play with this. So you can lift the head and then lift the foot. Place everything down. You can lift the foot and then lift the head. And you'll feel that the way you engage the back is different depending on where you lift first. And now look for a little bit more of a precise sense of lifting the leg and lifting the head simultaneously. And the reason to do this is this kind of timing is a way to refine the distribution of effort all along the length of the spine. And as you continue to play with the movement, you still rest as often as you need to, for as long as you like between movements, but consider also the return movement to the floor. You place the head, or maybe it's a sense of the back of the hands behind the head touching the floor. But do you place the head down first, or do you place the foot down first? So play with that. Lift the head and the foot, but then lower one place to the floor and then the other. And then the next time you do it, change the order. And then try lifting the head and the foot simultaneously and placing them on the floor simultaneously. Just notice you have to get much more specific with your attention to do that. Okay, leave it all alone. Bring your arms out, lengthen your legs on the floor, and take a rest. And feel how your back contacts the floor on the right side and on the left side. Sense into the 5 lines. Okay, bend your knees, stand your feet. Change the interlacing again if you like. Bring the hands behind the head. Point the elbows towards the ceiling. And then lift the left foot as you lift the head, and think of bringing the left elbow towards the left knee and the left knee towards the left elbow. And again, just make the size of the movement comfortable for you. Each movement, you're looking for something that feels easier, lighter, more comfortable than the previous movement. And that's what all of those variations are about. So play with the idea that the elbow could be moving towards the inside of the knee or the outside of the knee. And notice that those different trajectories, they're different ways of pressing your back into the floor. It's a different movement through space. You probably actually move your elbow a little closer to the midline or further away, or the trajectory that you lift your foot changes. Continue to take rests as you go along, but now notice again the timing. What lifts first? What follows? What comes down to the floor first? Very good. Pause here, take a rest, and then alternate. Lift your head and lift your right leg with one movement, and then with the next one, you lift your head and your left leg. Thinking of the elbow and the knee on each side coming towards each other. And again, aim for a timing where the lifting and the lowering is simultaneous. And if you're experiencing that the movement is simpler on one side, why do you suppose that is? Try to even out the quality of the movement. Another thing to notice is that the foot that stays on the floor, does the knee stay over the foot? Do you feel a solid support from the leg that's still down? That could be a difference side to side. Okay, place both feet on the floor, put your head on the floor, bring the arms out, take a rest. You can keep the feet standing or you can lengthen the legs. Roll your head a little side to side. And then bend your knees, stand your feet, bring your hands behind your head. And this time lift the left foot from the floor as you lift the head and bring the right elbow and the left knee towards and away. And so now the shape is diagonal. So feel the twist in the spine, feel which part of your back presses the floor to make this movement. Continue with the idea of resting as much as you need. You don't get more benefit by making more movements. You get more benefit by finding more clarity. So use the same tools that we've been using, creating variations in terms of thinking of moving the elbow towards the inside or the outside of the knee, and being aware of the timing of the lifting, the timing of the lowering. And then make a few movements where you think of the left elbow coming towards the right knee. So leave the left foot on the floor, lift the right foot with the head, exploring the other diagonal in different ways. And you can always change the interlacing of your hands if you like, which you already know will create subtle changes in the arms and the shoulders. And now lift the left elbow and the right knee towards each other and keep them both lifted. And now put your foot back down, but keep the head up. And then lift the foot, and as you lift the foot, put the head down. And keep doing that so that you lift and lower in such a way it's as if you were holding a stick between your left elbow and your right knee. As the head goes up, the foot goes down. As the foot goes up, the head goes down. And then rest for a moment. And then try bringing the elbow and the knee towards each other and away again. And see if that movement feels a little bit refreshed. And try that on the other side. Lift the right elbow towards the left knee towards the right elbow. Keep them both lifted. Lower the head and bring the knee further up. And then as you lift the head again, take the knee away. Again, as if you were holding a stick between the knee and the elbow so that distance doesn't change and you're rolling diagonally over your back. And then go back to taking the elbow and knee towards and away. And then do one diagonal and do the other. And then take a complete rest. And just feel, how does your body rest on the floor at this point? What's your sense of length in the spine? Is there something new in your relationship to the 5 lines of your body? You can see how most of what we've been doing, it's the shapes that kind of remind you of doing crunches, right? But there's all these details you may have never considered. Bend your knees and stand your feet. And remember what you did in the very beginning. I asked you to test the weight of your head by lifting the head without the help of the arms. So try that just once or twice now. Is the head lighter than it was before? Now rest your head. And in a moment, I'll ask you to do that again, but I'm going to ask you to consider one more thing. So again, the head is at the top of your spine. If those 5 lines were like a drawing that a little kid makes, and they just draw one line, draw the other. They draw the spine, they put a little circle on top for the head, right? But hopefully it's clear by now that when you lift the head, that's an action that really draws on the whole length of the spine. So with your feet standing now, sense your sit bones, bones on the bottom of your pelvis that you'd be sitting on if you were sitting in a chair right now. And imagine that someone was sitting on the floor right close to you so that they could make fists with their hand and they could press their fists into your sit bones and push up in the direction of your head. Just imagine that push coming up through the length of your spine, how it could push your head up the floor away from your feet. And now, one last time, you're going to try to, well, you're not going to try, you're going to do it. But when you lift the head to look down, imagine that you were receiving that push and that the lifting the head was this large arcing movement. So it's not just up away from the floor towards the ceiling, but you're rounding yourself, but it's a sense of lengthening the spine up away from the feet, even as you lift the head to look down towards the space between your knees. Very nice. Place the head on the floor again. And now roll to your side and come up into standing. And sense the length of your spine now, and the feeling of how your head sits on top of your spine. And then please take a walk through your room. See if you remember how this felt at the beginning. In particular, sensing the weight of your head on top of the spine, the whole length of the spine, your hip joints. Just enjoy the feeling you have here. And that's about it for our class today. So thanks so much for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.